Okay, it's about 5 after 7. My name is Stacy Castleman, and we want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. We are very blessed to have Dr. Sandra Stotsky here to fill us in with the information and her journey throughout this Common Core. She's going to go through her speech tonight. She will talk about the different things that she has done through her journey. So to kind of cut some time down a little bit here so we can focus more on her, I am one of the active moms with StopCommonCore in North Dakota, a group here in Bismarck. We have groups that are spreading out throughout North Dakota now. And so what we're doing is just, banding together to put an end to Common Core by educating other parents, getting out there, getting the word out there. That's one of the biggest things that we're really struggling with now is taking this information that we have received, whether, we print out more flyers and stop somebody at Walmart or in school or whatever, but just getting that information out by standing up and talking about our kids and what's important to our children. The more people that we tell, the easier it's going to be. We need numbers. We need parents. We need, grandparents, everybody to help us. And we do have 2 Facebooks. You can go to Stop Common Core in North Dakota on the Facebook groups. You can also go to StopCommonCoreInNorthDakota.com and get some information there. On the handouts that you have received tonight, both the email, there'll be an email address on there that is advocate@StopCommonCoreInNorthDakota.com, which is the longest email you will ever see. And then it also has the web address on there. So and that was one of the reasons too why we really wanted to get your emails tonight, so we can get that information out on some of the action items that we are doing. Example, there's a parade in Fargo this weekend, and there's a parade in Bismarck this weekend. And it is a great opportunity to see hundreds of people where they can say, hey, what is Common Core? Because there's still a lot of parents that do not know. And this way we can get out information. And so I encourage you to step out of your box and get into that parade and do something you might not normally do. We need to really reach out. Dr. Stotsky had an opportunity to speak with some legislators today. One of the things that we are looking for in the future is creating a petition, whether we would find out if it's a referendum or the initiative petition. We have to look and see what's going to fit best for our state. So we do a lot of action items, a lot of reaching out to parents. One of the things that I know that several parents in North Dakota are struggling with is the opting out of the testing. There is Operation OptOut.com. I got that right? OptOutND.com. Facebook is Operation OptOut. Which will give you information. There's a kit there, there's papers, everything that you need to opt out your kids. If you have questions, we will help you, we'll answer those questions. We are getting kind of some backlash from some of the schools, but we will be there to support each other and get through it. We did just find out some very exciting news tonight that Rain, North Dakota, one of the fathers had talked to each parent in his child's class, and the whole class opted out. So we are making headway. We need to get out there and be seen, and not just, Facebook is not going to end this. It's going to be us getting out in the community and showing what we believe in. So I'll end up talking for your hour. So I would like to introduce Dr. Sandra Stotsky.
Thank you. just want to make sure I'm not so tangled up in here that I wind myself up. Can I be heard now? This is louder? Let's see. It is on.
It is, you just have to talk more.
Okay, just talk more. Oh, I see. All right, fine. Thank you. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to come to North Dakota. This has been my first trip to North Dakota. I made my first and only trip to South Dakota last year, so I have been very excited about the opportunity to see states I never would see otherwise and to meet people from all over this great country that I've had the opportunity to meet, particularly parents and state legislators and local school board officials who have been the main audience that I have been seeing, although occasionally I do get to meet governors in small states, not yours yet, but maybe that will come one of these days. Let me tell you a little bit about my own background and philosophy so that you'll have a better understanding of where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to do. As you all know, I have come from the Massachusetts Department of Education over 10 years ago. I was in the department and was considered to be the person behind the revision or development of our K-12 standards in all major subjects. At the same time, from 1999 to 2003, I was also revising teacher regulations, teacher licensing regulations, and licensure tests. And I mention that because it was the whole package that I was responsible for coordinating. I was like a controller, and all the planes had to take off at once, and I had to make sure that they were all not bumping into each other, but working with each other, because teachers had to be trained and prepared to teach to higher standards. It's one thing to want and to build up and have stronger standards. It's another thing to have new teachers coming in and older teachers, already licensed, who are able to teach to them. So I was trying to do all of that simultaneously. Now, the philosophy that I brought to bear, which explains my opposition to a large extent to Common Core's standards, the philosophy that I brought to bear when I was shaping Massachusetts standards in those years had several prongs. First of all, I placed a great deal of value on content knowledge. You can't do critical thinking unless you know something. You're not going to be able to think analytically or critically very well if you just have a vacuum in your head. So you have to have standards that in some way point to the kinds of knowledge or skills or learnings that you want for your students. That was a major goal in Massachusetts. Secondly, we were trying to upgrade everyone. This is far more important now, I realize, than I thought at that time. We weren't trying to equalize academic expectations to make all groups equal, because we were trying to raise all groups. And the arithmetic doesn't work in both directions at the same time. We were trying to get everybody to move higher, because in this country, in our public schools, we have been going downhill for maybe 50, 60 years, long before Common Core came down the pike. So we wanted to make sure that all demographic groups were raised, and indeed, this is what eventually turned out to be the case. We were raising all groups, and some of the lowest performing groups were accelerating in their own achievement gains. And then we, of course, were trying to tie this to strengthening the teacher corps. And this has to happen in North Dakota as well as in the rest of the country. And that means making sure that your elementary teachers in particular are better trained to teach math, science, history, the subjects that they have to teach, but that they're not always well trained to teach. So we did that in Massachusetts by working on all of these things together, and found ourselves by 2005 at the very top, and you're going to wonder why I'm talking about this so much, it is because states are now beginning to think that maybe for an interim, while they develop their own first-class standards, they adopt Massachusetts pre-2009 standards. This is what Ohio was trying to do. Not a bad idea. We ended up in first place, grade 4, grade 8, reading and math on NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, in 05, 07, 09, 11, and 13. Quite a record. And by 07 and in 11, we were also on third, or Trends in International Mathematics Science Survey, which is an international test. We were tied for first place in science in grade 8. So we knew that we had good standards in place, and whatever we were doing with our teachers was helping them and not hurting them, certainly. So from that experience, I was then urged to get onto the Common Core Validation Committee. This was a committee established in 2009 by Common Core, lasted for a year, and the charge to the committee was to make sure that Common Core's standards were internationally benchmarked, research-based, and rigorous, among other things. I was one of the 5 people on this 29-member committee who refused to sign off because these were not rigorous standards. They were not internationally benchmarked, and I will go into more details later. And they certainly were not research-based because that was my background as an academic researcher. But it was a very bizarre committee from beginning to end. What does a validation committee do? It is supposed to validate, to independently, supposedly, ensure something is sound and rigorous. Well, we weren't independent. And one of the first things I think people should know about Common Core is that its standards have never been validated. They have never been independently validated. The validation committee was chosen by the very group that created the standards. And if you know anything about public policy, you know that whenever you've created something and you want to find out how good it is and you want to have it evaluated, you don't ask the people or the organization that did it. You go out and get independent experts who then can do what they think needs to be done for an evaluation. Well, we discovered we were supposed to be a rubber stamp. And we also had to sign a confidentiality agreement on our first meeting that we would never ever discuss for the rest of our lives what happened in committee meetings. It was a bizarre experience for me because I had been very active in my home community as a citizen in many kinds of community activities. I was a library trustee, 14 years, a town meeting member for 10 years on many selectmen committees. I knew what open meetings were all about, what sunshine laws were all about, what you had to do to ensure that you were running meetings with public input and awareness, and none of that took place. Common Core, as you probably know by now, was not state-led. It was developed by 3 private organizations in Washington, D.C. National Governors Association, Council for Chief State School Officers, and Achieve Incorporated. And they were funded to develop these standards by a 4th private organization, the Gates Foundation. So you can't get records. You have no idea who was chosen, why the particular writers were chosen, what their credentials were, what their charge was, how much they were paid. None of that is available as information. North Dakota had almost nothing to do with the development of the standards and with the tests, which I will talk a little bit more about as well. You are using a curriculum that was not a curriculum. You are enacting a curriculum directed towards standards that were created outside the state over which you had almost no control. nor did even the validation committee have any control over them. These people, the writers, did what they chose, and they were basically unqualified to write standards. I've written tons about this, so I'm not going to go into more detail here. If you want to see testimony I've written to that effect, you can go to my website on my homepage at the University of Arkansas, where I was for 5.5 years, and I'm now retired from the University of Arkansas, but I have been testifying for about 25 state legislatures in the last couple of years, and have pointed out that we had basically unqualified people developing the standards that are being used in North Dakota schools. And you've had some handouts that I will refer to in a few minutes, in which I will talk about the missing standards, because the question becomes, what kind of standards did North Dakota's Board of Education adopt for North Dakota? Legislature didn't know about them. I'll bet most of you parents didn't know about them, which is why you're here to learn something about them. Most local school boards, probably all, didn't know a thing about them, and this has been true all over the country. They were acquired or adopted by stealth, deliberately, because the people who created them did not want them discussed. I couldn't even get them discussed in Massachusetts either. I had been on the State Board of Education at the time, kept saying, what does college readiness mean? Could never get an answer from my own people in Massachusetts about it. It was like it didn't really matter. This was a silver bullet that was going to make all students college ready, even though we had no idea how they could possibly do that. In any event, we had writers chosen, as far as we know, by the Gates Foundation and Achieve, who developed these grade level standards that were then, in June of 2010, released and adopted within the next few months by almost all states without going through any kind of public process whereby anybody knew what was happening, especially parents and teachers, unlike what you had probably done for your own state standards in 2004 and 5 when they were adopted. So you have standards coming in, and if you can turn, if you have those pages, let me review briefly the missing standards for ELA, because I'd like to talk about those first. I guess I have to speak practically. Okay, maybe I just have to hold it up here. All right. Because if I want to talk, I don't want to be mouthing. Are they? Okay, you've got more handouts there. Okay, flaws in Common Core's English language arts standards and the literacy standards. You can see the first section on missing standards. These are missing standards that should have been in Common Core if you were to get some of the content knowledge developed. The deficits are extremely important. I want to talk a little bit about them, because if you have been a teacher or have spoken to your child's teacher, you will note that there is an enormous amount of writing going on in Common Core classrooms. Indeed, that was the emphasis. And why is it wrong? Because if anything should be stressed in K-12, it's reading. I come from a background in reading research, and one of the things we know from 100 years of reading research is that good writing comes from good reading. All good writers have been good readers, and if you want to produce good writers, you're going to have to spend time making sure they do a lot of good reading. That is not taking place in Common Core. What Common Core does is stress the reading of informational texts, not complex literary texts, about 50-50 each, because there are 10 standards for informational text, 9 for literary text at every grade level. So you have a decline in literary study, which is where people learn to do a little bit of analytical reading and thinking. Why? Because it's the high school English teacher. Think back to your own high school experiences. It's the high school English teacher who teaches kids how to read between the lines of complex literary works. That's where you learn to start doing some analytical reading and thinking. Is there something I should be doing here? Okay. Now, if you have a reduction in literary study, you have that in conjunction with no list of recommended authors, literary movements, and literary periods. This is where kids are being deprived of their civic and literary heritage, basically, in an English-speaking country. This is something we made sure in the Massachusetts standards we had because our English teachers insisted upon it. Yours probably would too, except they had nothing to do with your standards, so they couldn't put in their 2 cents worth, or if they did, they were ignored. We don't know which because we don't have the records. We also have the problem of poorly written standards. They're not fewer, clearer, or deeper. I give an example here. And then the worst part I discovered only recently because I was working with 2 historians on the so-called literacy standards for history that are in the very end of the English Language Arts Standards document. And why I mention that is because most history teachers had no idea that English Language Arts Standards were going to cover them too. They thought English Language Arts Standards was simply for English Language Arts teachers. Surprise, surprise, they learned there were literacy standards for history teachers. And when you look at these standards, and when history teachers and historians have looked at them, they have discovered that they are inappropriate for for the study of history, because, as they point out, if you want to study history, you're going to want to emphasize skills like contextualization, sourcing, and corroboration. Those are not the skills you bring to a literary work. So the bottom line I'm trying to say is that Common Core standards are the wrong standards. Sometimes people wonder about whether I'm becoming a little bit too theatrical when I say they're going to damage your school curriculum. In some cases, they're inappropriate. They're too hard at lower grade levels. In many ways, they're too easy at higher grade levels. But overall, they are the wrong standards because they were created by people who didn't know what they were doing. But can you do anything about it? No, because you had to adopt them, and you did, verbatim. Now, you will hear from people in your own Department of Public Instruction that you had 60 educators who revised or did something to Common Core's standards, and you have something now called the North Dakota Academic Standards or Content Standards. A lot of states have changed the name. But you also had to agree to adopt verbatim Common Core. Cut and paste. That's really what your standards are, with a few curlicues, a few things that were taken out of parentheses or put into parentheses as examples. So you do not have North Dakota standards. You have Common Core standards with a misleading label on them. And the test is going to be a Common Core-based test. And you need to understand that you do not have North Dakota standards. You have Common Core's standards, just as Pennsylvania does, even though they have a different name for them, and just as many other states who have given their name, like Indiana, to something that's basically Common Core. It's a way to try to fool parents, not teachers, but mainly parents who don't understand what they are looking at. Now, if you look at the math standards, and here the disaster is clearer. Many of you probably can't read the math standards. I can't once it gets to algebra. I'm not a mathematician. How many of you can read a set of high school math standards? Raise hands. Any of you? Okay. And may I ask what your background is?
I'm a college graduate, but in math I triple majored. I was a pre-med biology, applied mathematics, general studies triple major.
Okay. That's what you need, in a sense, to be able to read a set of high school math standards. You need to be at the college level, probably in science, math, or engineering, to understand a set of high school math standards. Now, could your state board understand them? I doubt it. Board in Massachusetts couldn't either. Your governors can't. Your commissioners usually can't. They're not in those areas. So you end up with people who don't know how to read a set of high school math standards to know that there are a lot of missing standards starting at the high school level. The ones from kindergarten to grade 7 are not so much missing. Oh, right, okay. It's hard for me. I'm used to waving hands, okay. They're at different grade levels so that they put our kids in this country behind 1 or 2 grades by the end of grade 7. Those aren't rigorous standards. But the real problem, as I said, is when you go past algebra, algebra 1, and then you look at all the key topics that are missing. This is from Professor Milgram, a mathematician at Stanford. I wouldn't presume to mention these myself because I'm not a mathematician. But what this means, and he has said this for 5 years, we've been traveling the public speaking circuit together, is that there is no way for students to go from a weak Algebra 2 course, which is what Common Core ends with, to a Calculus 1 course, which is what you need for engineering, math, science, economics, finance, a whole bunch of other subjects now, if you want to finish in 4 years. I don't know how many would want to spend 6 or 7 years to make up for the math or science they didn't have in high school. Now, as I mentioned this to Kirsten Baszler about a month ago at a meeting, she said, well, Common Core is just a floor. North Dakota high schools can add what they want. Yes, in theory, they can. It won't be tested. Only Common Core standards will be tested. And when I asked, do you know how many high schools are teaching above the floor and what they are teaching above the floor? She couldn't answer. So this is something you can do by asking at your local high school. What is the projected curriculum in the next few years? The kids who are in grade 9 or 10 now will be able to finish. They're at the end of the pipeline. But kids who are in grade 6, 7, and 8 now may not find the courses they need when they get to high school. We don't know. This is a work in progress. It's a game that's being played. But you can see that there are some missing standards, and no mathematician has said, oh, but they're there. Professor Milgram is wrong. No, he's not wrong. This is someone who does know mathematics. And they may say, oh, but the first K through 5 is so much better than what you had in North Dakota. Maybe, but if all the rest is so much worse, where do you end up? And where do you want your kids to end up? That is why it's extremely important to involve your higher ed people. You have people at your universities, your mining colleges, who know what math and science your kid should be taking. As you're booming economically, the jobs of the 21st century are going to be the jobs that require people with STEM backgrounds and knowledge. And they're not going to come from your high schools or any other American high schools if their math and science sequences end here. Now, the question that I raised, and I've been speaking to Jim Milgram for 5 years about this, how come? Why did this happen? Why didn't they say so? Why did this happen? We don't know. No one will tell us. No one explains from National Governors Association, CCSSO, why the standards ended with a weak algebra 2 and why they didn't make what they called a third pathway to calculus available. Not required because you couldn't, in this country, require that for high school graduation of all students, but at least make it available and encourage it where you can. And of course, there's an equity issue here too, because what high schools may have, I think I've got a few more minutes left, right? Okay, 5. What high schools are apt to have the trig course or the pre-calculus course, the high schools where your parents are mathematically sophisticated enough to demand that it be there. So what will happen in low-income high schools or high schools where you don't have those kind of parents? Those kids won't even know what they're missing. Their parents won't even know what they're missing. And that was always the function of good public high schools historically. Try to have what we know the best of private schools offer, even if we can't have the same teacher-student ratio. Anyway, we have a serious problem with these standards, and how you get them out is what many states are now finding very difficult, because the plan for getting these standards adopted by state boards of ed and then implemented has been facilitated by one man's money, unfortunately. I think we all know what's going on because there have been articles about how the Gates Foundation is giving money to just about every organization in the country that moves, that has anything to do with education. And so you end up with one man's idea of what national standards should be like, and maybe national tests too, and now a big history project, as I was just telling a few people, because he's also come up with some ideas about what history should be in our high schools. And you have to ask yourself, what happened to we the people in all of this? Where are they? You have to keep raising that over and over again. Why aren't you deciding, with the help of your higher ed faculty, what they think should be required for admission to their universities? You don't need somebody in Washington, D.C. telling you. Your people can do it, your engineers, your engineering faculty. It's become a very bizarre situation, and yet you will find major organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as one that keeps pumping out what is talking points or propaganda about how you will save yourself all that money on remediation if you have college-ready students in grade 11. Now, how do you get to no remediation in college? Very simple. If you've lowered the level of what they need to pass to grade levels, it's very simple. You've wiped out remediation by definition, and that's exactly what will be happening. Now, that's a trick. That's not wiping out remediation. It just means everybody knows less. But it doesn't solve the problem of the disciplines that need more and more knowledge in either science or math. So we have serious issues that have been brushed under the rug by boards of education, departments of education, who typically don't have the knowledge base necessary. I doubt that there are many people in your Department of Ed that could read these math standards too, by the way. I just don't know your Department of Ed. But I would bet that there are very few people that could read these math standards and knew that they were missing. I know the department we had in Massachusetts, and most of those people couldn't do it either. We had to, and we did go out to get advice from local mathematicians to help us with our own math standards, particularly since we created a set of pre-calculus standards that are in the old Massachusetts standards. But we knew that we didn't have that kind of talent in the Department of Ed. I don't know what your Department of Public Instruction did, but certainly you need to start worrying about being run by a bureaucracy that was ignorant, basically, of what is really needed for college readiness and how much your economy is going to depend upon authentic college readiness. Now, I would like to take questions now. I'm going to stop right now because I don't like to spend, even though I can, 3 hours talking straight. So please, if you have questions, how do you want to handle it? Cards, do you want to moderate, or do you have a procedure you think would be good?
Yeah, we can field questions. And if you could just repeat the question.
I'll repeat the question, okay.
If we could shut that door.
Okay, you can stand up and just talk loud because there isn't any mic for the audience.
They said in the Catholic schools they can take the good and use that, and if there's some they don't like, they don't have to use. So that's why our diocese has put it in all of our Catholic schools. Can you comment?
The Catholic schools, for reasons best known to themselves, because they didn't have to, I've met this problem in many states, including Massachusetts, didn't have to adopt Common Core's standards. This person asked a question about the position of the Catholic schools. And some bishops have now, in different parts of the country, rejected Common Core. Others have just ignored the parents who've come to them and asked them. I know that happened in the Boston Archdiocese. And you've had Common Core taught, and the reasons are almost laughable. This is what has really annoyed parents in many parts. I can't speak for what has happened here in North Dakota. But in the Boston area, parents complained about having Common Core in their parish schools. Independent Catholic schools in the Boston area tend to offer not offer Common Core at the high school level because they want the math to be there. But the parish schools were adopting Common Core because the superintendent of schools was promoting it. And the reason was that since most of these kids go on into public high schools, it becomes the responsibility of the Catholic elementary school to prepare kids to go back to the public high school. And these parents thought, this is a bizarre reason. Is this why you send your kids to a Catholic school, to be prepared to go back to a public high school? So, you know, we have peculiar reasons. Another reason I was told by a publisher of Catholic materials when I asked this question, he said, well, we think Common Core is stronger. And in order for Catholic schools to keep up with the competition, they have to adopt a stronger set of standards. But I said, all the statistics we have are in inner cities. Catholic schools do better than the public schools. So why would you want to flip it? No answer. It doesn't make sense, frankly.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
You can address. One of the concerns has been data mining for our children and what they're doing with these assessment tests between this private organization that has access and gives us these tests. Where is that information being put, and what are they doing with that? And my other question is, are teachers in the university settings being trained in Common Core now?
Okay, those are two different questions, but they're both very important ones. Data mining and teacher training in Common Core. Data mining is what is coming with the tests. It's not in Common Core standards, but remember, Common Core standards require a Common Core-based test under No Child Left Behind, which you're still under. You have to keep figuring out where you are in this game. And so far as Jane Robbins, who is a lawyer, has been able to figure out, because she looks at these contracts, when the state contracts with one of the testing consortia, in this case Smarter Balance, it doesn't look like the data, the information from your kids will go any farther than the testing contractor. But the testing contractors have contracts with USED to send them any data they get. So they can serve as middlemen, even if you don't know it. Now, to me, the answer, and Jane almost agrees with this, that if you don't want children's personal information or family personal information, you don't allow your children to take any Common Core-based tests on computers. You can ask for paper and pencil unless you're bold enough to say, I'm not going to allow my child to take any Common Core-based test, period. You can withhold or require the school not to ask for certain information, but with many kids, it's almost impossible to know whether they've given the answer. If they sign up to take a test on a computer, it's going to ask for their name, their grade, their teacher automatically. And little kids are just going to do that. That's almost all they need. And then you don't know what else is going to be there. So it becomes very hard, even with good laws about how much or what kind of data can be asked for. It becomes very hard to keep the data from going to the testing company, and then you can't keep the data from going from the testing company to the USED. Now, where does it go there? That's what we're still not clear about. It looks like it's going for something called workforce development. They're going to track all kids, decide what careers. I mean, we've heard about this sort of thing in other countries over the years. It's never worked well, but we really don't understand what they're planning to do yet. Now, the teacher education piece is a very important one because that's my area of particular interest. And what has happened is that we had a merger last summer of the two education school accreditation companies into something called CAEP. That's the new merger for accrediting education schools. And one of the criteria, professional standards used, is that new teachers, prospective teachers, are being trained to teach to Common Core's standards. That locks it in. If your teaching core is only trained to teach to Common Core and comes into your school systems, that's all they can do. Now, what does this mean in math and science? It means a total dumbing down because that's what's in Common Core. And if you have, which I gather you haven't yet, next generation science standards, different states are doing different things with that. I gather you haven't adopted that yet. Wyoming, I think, just voted not to allow their Board of Ed to adopt that. Next generation science standards are even worse than Common Core's math standards. When I say that, what do I mean? They don't contain standards for high school chemistry. They don't allow you to teach the lab-based physics course. So what does that mean? You have to think about what was going on in the minds of the people developing these standards if the things that should be in a normal public high school aren't going to be there. But the teacher training schools are going to be training teachers to Common Core, not to the subjects, not to the disciplines, but to Common Core, to standards, which is something that has not happened in the past when you were planning to be a teacher of a subject, not a teacher of Common Core's standards or some other kind of standards. Any other questions?
Question here.
Oh.
Oh, you can go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to ask, I know I've heard a little bit about this before.
Speak up just a little louder, please. I'm sorry.
Could you give a little more of an example of when you talked about the informational text and the literary text, and you're saying that they're, you're talking from the...
They're about 50-50.
Some examples of, you know, when you say that they're not really literary, and then that's free to the students?
Examples of informational text, is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, just kind of...
Okay, literary text means what we would assume it means. It means works of the imagination, so it would be poetry, drama, fiction. English teachers have always taught nonfiction because they approached the teaching of these different kinds of texts as genres. But informational text has been sort of taken out of something called nonfiction, where it belongs under in a strict classification sense, and it's been made strictly by David Coleman's own mandate because this was not supported by any research and no one ever had a chance in an English department to vote on it. But informational text means information about something, and almost anything passes for information that I've seen. In fact, what many parents have been complaining about is the kind of propaganda that seems to pass itself off as information. But every school can have different kinds of informational text, so there's no one way I can describe it. English departments are supposed to find the kinds of texts that could be called informational texts. But a more basic problem is that English teachers never taught information. That was not their task. They were teaching about genres and literary study and how to read between the lines of complex literary texts by high school. Information is taught in a science or a math or a history class, so it's not even clear what is meant by that and what will be on the test. Now, I didn't get to say much about the tests, but you do have a right, as I've discovered, if you're over 20, which most of you look as if you are, to see the tests that are being given to your children or grandchildren. The problem is going to be that they're in a computer. I don't know how you're going to be able to see them easily, and it's computer adaptive testing, which means that if a kid gets a reasonably hard passage right, he is then, or she is then directed to even harder passages, and if the child gets the reasonably hard passage partially wrong, then the child is redirected to easier passages. That's what computer adaptive testing means. And how you exercise what I gather is a statutory right here in North Dakota, I don't know. But I have suggested that you toss that hot potato back to the Department of Public Instruction to pass it back to the testing company. Here's the North Dakota law. How are you going to make these tests accessible to parents who want to see it? You have a right to see a test before it's given. Let them figure it out. I don't know how to figure it out. But that is a problem. And then you'll find out whether most of what is being offered on the test itself is informational or literary. That's the only way you're going to find out, is when you can see the test. We had strict rules in Massachusetts about that, and we also had to release test items every year. So parents and others could always see every year what was being assessed. If you don't have that rule in statute, then you can't find out what your kids have been assessed on and what college readiness means. You don't even know what the level of reading is going to be on the passages. To me, that is a gross disservice to parents and to kids. They have no idea, unless, even if you're given a few examples, you don't even know if those are cherry-picked examples. Anyway, these are all questions. Why don't we go, you first and then you. Go ahead.
What was it about the people on the core validation committee who rubber stamped this Common Core thing?
What may have motivated?
Those people, what made them rubber stamp it?
Okay. Actually, we don't really know. You can find the list of these people on the website, because there was a report done of the validation committee. It was a very thin report. Remember, there was a confidentiality agreement. Nothing could ever be released, so what could the rapporteur report on? He had very little except the names of the people on the committee and then the names of the people who signed off. And the 24 people who signed off were connected to schools of ed, to testing. 4 of them were from other countries. Why? We don't know. I mean, it's just a very bizarre committee. Why they signed off, one can only speculate, and that's all. I mean, we have no evidence about motivation. Some of them may work for Common Core in some way, or they get grants from the USCD. I know one of them gets an annual grant for a center, so that there may be other motivations. You don't want to bite the hand that's feeding you. So if you think you're required to sign off on a document when you know it's ludicrous and pro forma, there has to be something that you're concerned about so that you don't risk whatever connection you may have. But we don't know. Sorry, I can't answer. We only know that 5 didn't sign off of the 29 who were there. Professor Milgram posted his criticism. He was the only mathematician on the validation committee. You have to know that. There were supposedly 8 other math experts, but most of them were in schools of education, and they probably couldn't read a set of high school math standards either. But that's all we know. There was someone over there.
I just wanted to mention that there are no teachers in the public education system in North Dakota that have a subject matter degree in math or science.
You don't have to be licensed in math or science in order to teach it at the high school level?
They're education degrees. They have degrees in education, but they don't have a degree, per se, in math or science.
Okay, does it,
As far as I know, no public school teaches calculus in North Dakota, but some schools send seniors to a higher education, like NDSU or somewhere like that. That's how they offer calculus.
all right. I don't know your licensing system. There are math education majors or science education majors in many states, but they do have to take a certain number of courses or credits in math to be licensed as a math educator. And if, I don't know, but who would teach Algebra 1 or geometry?
That's what I'm wondering.
Oh, all right.
I say that because my mother taught math at Fargo South for 34 years before she retired years ago. She had a master's degree in mathematics and a degree in chemistry and a degree in education. And there's no teacher like that anymore. There used to be.
Oh, we used to have teachers with higher degrees. This is a whole other issue, and I won't go into it. But I was told by a Springfield administrator when I was in the department, and I had no idea. She said, today, we used to have years ago a PhD or at least an MA or MS degree person in charge of a department, particularly math or science in our big city school systems. She said, today we're lucky if we can find someone who majored in the subject to be the K-12 specialist. I mean, this is quite a come down. No other country would tolerate that.
Are there any other questions?
How will opting out of those Common Core tests affect your kids getting into college, if at all?
We don't really know much more except that if you pass a college readiness test, which appears to be given in grade 11, that seems now to be the grade level everywhere, and the student is deemed college ready, then they're college ready. I mean, there isn't any more to know about it, but what that means, we still don't know. And you won't know unless you can take a look at the test items and also know where the cut score or the pass score is. That's how it's going to affect your kids. What it does in lower grades will be individual decisions that should be made by your local school board, but I don't know if they're going to make them because you may have administrators in your local school districts making decisions that should be made by your local school board. For example, whether a child who's opted out is declared truant for the day. To me, that is a local school board decision. It's not an administrator's decision. But this is something that parents are going to have to learn to ask questions about regularly because you're going to be told an awful lot of things that may not be so, and you may be told things simply to quiet you down.
In the back.
Can you touch on the developmentally inappropriate standards of the K through 3?
Can I comment? Is that what she asked?
Can you touch on the
Oh, I'll talk, yeah. Yes, there were, within a year after the standards came out, there was a petition with about 250 names or so of early childhood educators who were very critical of what they saw as developmentally inappropriate standards because they had not been called upon to help with the K through 3 standards in particular. Nothing's been changed, of course, because there's no mechanism for changing Common Core. As I mentioned, you had to adopt them verbatim, and there's no mechanism for changing them. But these people, and you can find the petition on the web. If you just Google in Early Childhood Educators Petition, Common Core, you'll pick it up. And they complained about things like asking first graders to write paragraphs of explanation for a math problem or something else. I mean, it made no sense to any teacher that some of these things could be done. There are many standards that are inappropriate. They look very sophisticated, and maybe it was done purposely so that there could be a claim that they were trying to raise standards. We don't know. One can become very cynical about the whole process. But what starts off as very tough and then becomes easier and easier. And Milgram says by middle grades, it's definitely very weak in the middle grades in math, and by high school, he calls it a disaster. But this is one man's adjectives.
I've been reading, or they've been talking about making the ACT, which has become more of a standard for the test more than the SAT, but they've talked about Common Core aligning the ACT. And the best I can get out of that is that they want to make it more contextual, like not only that you have a broad general knowledge that you've got the subjects, but that the concern about people about not doing, like a lot of us are homeschoolers, and the concern we have with not doing Common Core classes is that when our kids go to take a standardized test, it's going to be like ask them something about an environmental question that they got out of some book someplace that may not be factually based, it may not be objective, it's very contextual to what they're teaching in Common Core. And to me that seems, well, I don't know, it seems kind of un-American to do it that way. It's not testing knowledge, it's testing whether you were in the right classes and listening.
Well, that's going to be part of the problem if you don't have a way to see the tests to know whether these are appropriate items and whether this is a curriculum, I mean, whether the testing is related to a curriculum that's a legitimate curriculum in a school. Environmental items often have crept in the past through earth science, which became sort of tainted, I remember, in Massachusetts years ago. And we tried to fix that up with what we did with earth science and get out all the environmental stuff that was simply political additions to, and we had to get the cooperation of earth science teachers, people who were trained as geologists, and make sure we were giving appropriate standards in geology, not environmentalism. But if you can't see the test items ever, you just don't know. You're at a loss. And I don't know what more to say to homeschooling parents, since apparently you are going to be giving the test. You have to, under one scenario, I believe.
Well, the ACT is pretty much the standard to get your kids into college. So if the ACT test is asking trick questions that only people that took Common Core classes were taught, then you don't know, you don't know the trick answers to the questions. You just know that's something they read out of an objective text someplace. And if they didn't ask the specific or tell you this little piece of propaganda, well, you don't know how, you can't even teach to the test. You're trying to teach objectively, and then the tests are not objective, so then it becomes very politicized in my mind. So we worry that we're going to be at a disadvantage, even though we have a very high esteem for education. And so,
one suggestion I have made in many states, and any state could do this, is for the state higher ed faculty from all of your universities and colleges to create your own matriculation exam so that you don't have to use either ACT or SAT. Homeschoolers would benefit from that. All you would have is your state matriculation exam if you want to go to a state college or university. And it would be controlled by the faculty in your own state university. To me, that would be something your legislature could mandate. So therefore, you're not dependent upon what Coleman has done in lowering the SATs. ACTs are already aligned to Common Core. Almost every other test, the GEDs are aligned to Common Core. It seems like everything has been aligned down. But if each state develops its own matriculation exam, we're back to where we were like in 1900, but it wouldn't be a bad situation.
federal money was given to North Dakota in return for accepting these standards, or how did that work? Was there money tied to?
No, as I understand it, North Dakota did not apply for Race to the Top, or didn't get Race to the Top money. So you didn't get any money for adopting these standards.
Nothing for it. We did get TARP money. Anyway. We did get
TARP,
initial
earlier.
TARP money, that money we got.
There was an
Go to the DPI and you'll see
stimulus money earlier.
how much was used for.
Earlier stimulus money, that's what you're talking about? Yeah.
You want to pipe up?
Well, I found 70 million in 2009 for education reform, and then another 28 million in May of 2010 for more education reform. And that one, I think the 20 or 28 million was more for updating the technology with the state longitudinal data system. So about 100 million that I found.
It's not a great deal amount for North Dakota. It's, given what its surplus seems to be in its budget, not a great, huge amount of money that you got. But there were probably other perks that were presented that seemed like a bargain, particularly the idea that if you had college-ready standards, then you wouldn't have all that remediation at the college level, 40%, whatever it was.
Put the hand up in the back there.
Okay.
Your arm's probably tired.
My question is it being incorporated at the college level into the curriculum, the Common Core?
I didn't hear her first.
Is it being implemented at the college level as well?
I don't know, and that might depend upon how cooperative colleges and community colleges are. There are community colleges that are changing their curriculum, and Gates Foundation has been giving money. I don't know if any of them are in North Dakota or not. I haven't been on top of that. So I can't answer your question about what colleges are doing, but they are soon going to have to grapple with who passes a college readiness test. Remember, the test hasn't been given yet. Next year may be the first year for the test. And once you have one or two cohorts of so-called college readiness graduates of your high schools, then the question will be your higher ed faculty in math particularly will have to figure out what to do about providing them with credit-bearing coursework. This is still remaining to be worked out, so I couldn't tell you at this point anywhere what they're doing.
Well, I have a comment and a question. I can't take notes if I stand.
Be loud.
Well, some new people have been here for a year, in the States for a year, are from Iraq, and the two students are a junior in high school and a freshman in high school. The freshman in high school said what they're doing, particularly in math and science, is what they did in 5th grade in Iraq. Oh. Is Iraq one of the highest standard places? You can imagine the school situation in Iraq can't be wonderful. Anyway, that really puts us down pretty low. Then the question is, I've been involved with Christian education and homeschooling. And Christian ed people say, well, I use Christian curriculum, I'm not going to be affected. Is that true? Or how can they escape?
Well, I couldn't tell you, but if you called up the, what is it, the ABECA people and there's one other, there are two different publishers for Christian schools if they use, ask them if they have made their adjustment. They might not tell you, but you can, maybe it's in the book, but they certainly could tell you directly. I mean, it may not be visible, but most publishers of textbooks are making their material look Common Core aligned.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. 3 topics. The theory of evolution. Number 2, global warming. And number 3, revisionist history. I have a fellow that I know in Bismarck who's been involved in the school system here for 45 years, who said this is the biggest separation from who America is in the entire federal public or federal school system. And in one generation, these kids won't know who America is.
Well, that may be the result of this big history project that I mentioned that Gates has been funding for piloting, and APUSH as well, the Advanced Placement U.S. History course. But you should be able to still have your own state history and U.S. history taught as you want it, because it's not Common Core. History is not a common set, it doesn't come from Common Core standards. Only English and math so far. But if you adopt and use the Advanced Placement U.S. History course, it may spread to the other history courses in your high school, because they will see what's being taught in the Advanced Placement course and think that that's what they should be doing in other courses. That's one of the criticisms that's been raised about it, that it is a subtle or behind-the-scenes attempt to influence all the rest of the history curriculum through the AP, which will go for the best readers in each high school. A lot of this is simply speculation. We don't know what's happening in high school by high school.
Kathy, did you have a question?
I think that the opt-out thing again is still a confusing question, because Common Core line tests, which are they? When you read the Smarter Balance agreement, it says that there will be at least 2 a year. Well, when? You know, we know there's supposedly one in the spring, but when is the other one? And so if a parent is trying to opt out, which tests do they opt out of? You know, Rob Bauer of DTI said parents have the right to opt out. So we know that, but which tests do they opt out of?
You can always, first of all, try to ask them when they think the DPI thinks that these tests will be given. If they don't know there's something wrong, they may not tell you. But you can, as I was telling parents almost facetiously this afternoon, every month, first day of the month, send a little note to school. If there are any tests this month that are Common Core based, I want my child opted out. And do it every month. I mean, I don't know how else you can handle it if you can't get the information you want from the schools. Or, better yet, I was also suggesting parents don't need permission to keep their kids at home. I mean, they've always been able to do that for hundreds of years. If you want to keep your kid at home, you send an excuse note. But you should be able to, with a few other parents, petition your local school board and say that you want a policy that whenever there is a test that is not teacher-made, because you want to leave those always in place, that you want instruction given to your child. That's it. You want a policy by the school board that there will always be an instructional period made available for all children whose parents don't want them to take any Common Core-based test. You don't have to name it, and you don't have to give a date. And if you find out that your kid has been given the test, bring a lawyer with you to school.
Because right now, I don't know how many people have looked at the schedules for the testing in North Dakota. Schools barely started the first week of school, they were already testing. What are they missing out on? They're getting assessed before they even get any sort of instruction.
Yeah.
Is that how it's supposed to be?
What are testing? Well, they know they're testing their attitudes and opinions. They want to know where they are when they stop.
Baseline. I mean, I'm sure they're saying that's baseline testing.
All right, there's a question in the center here.
How do we know that the curriculum that's being taught is Common Core curriculum? Is it all just Common Core right now, or is there some of it that's old stuff that's still coming through? It's like my daughter came home with some homework yesterday, and her answers were all wrong, because she didn't write them in sentence. Like, seriously, you asked her a question, she's going to put one-word answer, because that's all the answer is. So is that a Common Core curriculum answer, or is that just stupid? I mean,
Well, I couldn't answer for you, but it seems to me that parents should be able to get that information from a school principal.
It might say in the bottom of the page, because my daughter has been trying for 3 days to do her history exam. She's a 7th grader. And she's having difficulty because she's having to list what vocabulary words are nouns, verbs, or adjectives in history class. And she asked her teacher today what the symbols down the bottom And he said, do you know what that is? He's a new teacher from Pennsylvania. Do you know what that is? And she said, yes. Do you want to know more? No. But it would probably say on the bottom of their page.
The work page, yeah. But you still should be able to get an explanation if you called up the principal and asked the principal to ask the teacher. I would just say generally, from my own experience, it's better not to look as if you're attacking or criticizing the teacher. It's always better to go and let the principal contact the teacher, bring you back the information if the principal can find out any information.
Our teacher is the assistant principal.
All right. I mean,
It's not going to be a good year. But it just, I don't want to attack a subject that doesn't need to be attacked. So I would like to.
yeah. No, it's just that you don't want any perception that you are criticizing or in any way going after the teacher. I'm just saying that this is something that teachers become very defensive about, or the unions do, or whatever. And it's just better to go to a principal and expect the principal to be able to speak to, I mean, they should be able to explain what it is they're doing. If they don't, then you have a very serious problem, because they themselves are being stuck in the middle of a situation where they can't explain adequately to parents what they're doing, because they're being given material themselves that they had no voice in any way in shaping. It's a very chaotic time, and this is not easy. Every school is going to be handling it differently. Every state is.
It's funny that you just said it's a very chaotic time, because that was my question, is that it sounds like chaos. And so you're talking about school after school, state after state across the country. How is everybody handling this? Why isn't there more rebellion? I know we hear articles here and there, the school is the parents are opting out, this diocese is opting out, but it seems like it's just spotty, and with so much chaos, why isn't it, or is there going to be more and more of an uproar? What are you seeing?
It's hard to know, because the media are definitely clamping down and not reporting as much as they could. And we don't know how much of this is being directed from above. There has been an attempt not to report, and teachers are also fearful of their jobs, and so they don't want to report things going badly either, nor do administrators want to report things going badly. But there are pockets of rebellion everywhere in this country, every state, believe me. And it's reaching legislators. It's just that many parents are, as you have always been this way, this is not news, have always been indifferent to what goes on in the schools. They drop their kids off and they don't pay attention. And now you have a growing group of parents who do pay attention suddenly speaking up, and they weren't prepared for it. I was talking about that earlier. I'm pretty sure that the Common Core folks and the departments of ed were not prepared for as much parent uproar as they're now getting. They didn't realize those parents were out there anymore.
And I just want to say, for North Dakota, there's more opposition than probably most people realize. There are the little pockets across North Dakota, and we just keep trying to get them all together. We just got to keep fighting as parents. I mean, look how many people are here tonight, and the more we keep speaking out, the more parents that know about it. I mean, somebody just said they just found out about it on Sunday, wherever that person was. It's new to a lot of people. We went to a meeting today with Dr. Stotsky, and there were a couple parents there that, again, just found out about it in the last couple weeks. And several of us have been researching it for a long time and know a lot more. But those parents that are just getting new to it, they're sick to their stomachs and they don't know what to do.
Can I just ask one more thing along those lines? Because you're talking about the parents, but aren't teachers getting upset too? Because they're the ones that have to teach this. And most of them went into it probably because they feel some sort of calling. I don't think everybody went for the summer vacations. I think to do that kind of job, you have to have had a desire to teach. So
Teachers are very reluctant. They're beginning to, and in some places where there are enough of them, as in New York State, they have really begun to speak up as a group. But teachers are afraid about losing their jobs. So they have, in many communities, they're conveying to a union rep in the building. And the union rep is the only one who knows how bad it is, which is why the unions have become very concerned about the testing aspect of it and have actually been trying to be critical without looking as if they're that critical, because they also were given money, unfortunately, by Gates to pay them off too 5 years ago. But they are hearing from teachers, and I know this, I've spoken in other states to people who are active in their state unions, even in right-to-work states, and they're hearing a lot from their teachers, but the teachers will not speak up publicly. They will not be identified.
And we have teachers in North Dakota who are against it, although we'll be told, you know, 60 teachers are the ones who helped with the forming of these Common Core standards. There's a lot of teachers, but they're scared. It's their job, it's their paycheck. There's teachers that are opting their kids out though too, so.
If you take a look at North Dakota, look at how many teachers, if you just look around in your building, are retiring or taking early retirement. We're losing the teachers that were well-rounded. Just, and the buildings are now becoming filtered with teachers that are in that college.
The older teachers are starting to retire.
Yes, this I've been hearing in a lot of places, and this is a very worrisome trend, that your older experienced teachers are leaving as soon as they can, and they're being replaced by teachers who have come through the education schools with this as their training. So you're getting a weaker teacher in several ways possibly, but you're losing better teachers.
In the back. I couldn't see you behind the pole, sorry.
I'm thoroughly disgusted with all things that are Common Core. I watched Building the Machine, and I'm pretty sure you contributed to that, and that was very informative. If you guys have not watched it, it's a very good piece on what Common Core is. I homeschool. At first I thought, you know, I'm not going to get into my eyeballs in this. It's not going to affect me all that much. I have an older teen and a 12-year-old. It's going to affect everybody if it's not squashed now. Our governor is in favor of it. I don't think we're going to get anywhere with DEI. I think it's the local school boards. You need to pressure them. You need to constantly be knocking on that door. Email, call. Our legislative session is coming up. Find out who your legislators are if you don't know them, and start corresponding with them now. They do feel the pressure. Our legislators do hear us when we flood their email and we flood their phone. But I don't see, I mean, I don't want to be oversimplistic, but you know, the testing, yes, I'm concerned about that. But it's what's being taught all the other days of the week in the classroom that is thoroughly disgusting. I mean, so I'm just concerned. I just want to encourage people, if you have not contacted your legislators, start.
Yeah, I learned a long time ago, I was telling people, when my own children were small, I was known in my community. I just went right to the assistant superintendent or to the principal, the headmaster of the high school, or the principal of the elementary school. I always went to them and something happened. I mean, there was always a change in something as a result of constant complaining. So I didn't care that I was either called a witch by the union or something else. I mean, it didn't bother me because, as all of you know, when you're fighting for your children's education, that is the year, the only year they have of that education that year. If they lose a year, it can't be made up. So this is something you have to keep after. And if principals and administrators and school boards, to me, if they hear often enough from people who are concerned and keep raising issues, and you keep asking, where is the statute? One of the important things is to make sure they know what the law actually says. Some of them have heard that things are against the law, but they don't have any statutory authority to say that. If you have examples of papers that you think are bad, bring it to them. You always have to be concrete about what it is you're complaining about. That they do need to know about. But if you complain often enough, they will want, the squeaky wheel will get some oil. They will try to do something. And administrators don't want trouble all the time. That doesn't make their life very easy. So the more you keep bothering them, calling up school board people at 11 o'clock at night, they're going to try to handle it if they know that it's more than one. They may say, oh, you're the only parent. That was always tried with me. You're the only parent that's ever complained about X. And then when I wrote a letter to the editor, I found out, you know, there were dozens of other parents complaining about X. I mean, this is a typical trick.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then Dr. Stotsky will probably be around for a little bit longer, but we're going to have to try to wrap this up. So, somebody, who? Hans?
Go ahead.
Okay. Maybe this is a good last question. I'm interested to hear what your Common Core elevator speech is, right? If you have 1 minute to convince someone, because most people aren't going to listen to people longer than a minute anyway. And I haven't heard, a lot of people talk about it, they don't have that prepared, and I bet you do.
I'm sorry, what's?
1 minute to say why you don't like Common Core, what the problem is with it.
They're the wrong standards. Less than a minute.
Okay, you guys, I want to thank you guys all for coming. Hold on.
We will take just one more question. Right now, we've got a meeting in the other room, and so for all of us to be quiet and go out is difficult. So we'll take another question. But then also some other people had some questions in regards to donations and supporting, bringing in national speakers and stuff. You can send something to StopCommonCore in North Dakota, or we do have a donation jar over here. Before you go home, we do have t-shirts and stuff for sale. The other thing is those of you who are participating in the parade this weekend, now that you've decided that you're going to do that, awesome idea to get a t-shirt so you can be seen there. So just one more question. Will that work?
Sure.
High
sure.
five?
I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere.
Go ahead.
So many of the local officials in my county said that they liked Common Core because they have so many transients coming through, especially now in North Dakota, that everybody's got a different standard, and this Common Core gives them all the same standard. But you're saying it's a very chaotic time. So the Common Core doesn't give a security of the same things?
Oh yeah, that by the way has been one of the common defenses of Common Core, that we have such a mobile population that hundreds of thousands of kids are crossing state lines all the time. Now, it may be the case in a few communities here in North Dakota you have, and near military bases there may be a lot of kids going back and forth. But when people have looked at interstate mobility rates, it's less than 2% in the country. This is another trumped up issue. It's not real. It just may be the case in a few places that there are a lot of kids. But you know, the Department of Defense schools were always very good. They used to have a much better curriculum, and now they're all aligned to Common Core. They've gone down. And those kids did fine wherever they went for the most part, because they were usually ahead of the public schools they were in.
Anybody else?
How do you see, you've been traveling all over the country and dealing with different states, and it seems like a lot of us got sucked into this, you know, like by subterfuge. Which states have made significant steps towards getting out of this? And short of, you know, I feel like when we say we want to talk to our legislators, and a lot of us know our legislators personally.
Yeah.
Do that. But what's the what's the quickest fix to this?
I can't give you a general rule. I can only say that each state is doing it a little bit differently because the constellation of political forces and personalities is different. And this is what makes the difference. Ohio is trying to do it one way with a bill that is different from the one that Oklahoma did. Oklahoma had this fabulous person, Jenny White, who mobilized the state and the whole legislature to come up with a bill. But in each state, it seems as if it depends upon, you know, who the governor is, what kind of personality the governor has, and some of the key people in the House and the Senate. So I can't say that I know of any particular rule that I would follow, but half the states are trying to get out one way or the other. I mean, that at least says something in itself. You have to think about what you can try and learn from what other states have done. Now, I have suggested legislators here take a look at the Ohio bill, take a look at the Oklahoma bill. They're the two most recent ones. Pennsylvania is now doing its own thing. Their governor, Corbett, has recently indicated, because he's behind in polling, there's another reason. There's another reason. He's now suddenly becoming more anti-Common Core. And so people there are beginning to try to look for ways to develop something because suddenly they see an opening because someone has political ambitions and now wants to be on the side that might mobilize a constituency that he didn't know he had before. So these are the things that you can only, in each state, know, I mean, what you can do. But certainly the more noise you make and the more newspapers you get to write about it, which is important, and get your TV stations to talk about it. I mean, publicity is critical, and there's been a definite attempt to tamp down any negative stuff. So
some of the things that we've been asked here in North Dakota, and this is a question for you, are that if we just throw out the Common Core standards, what are we going to do? And so there are members of BPI here today, and that's one of their things. What are we going to do if we throw these standards out?
Right, and there are certainly different possibilities. In some states, as in Massachusetts, get rid of Common Core, go back to what we had. They were better, and everyone knows they were better. Oklahoma said we're going to go back temporarily, as I mentioned, for 2 years to what we had, and then we'll develop better ones under a new method. Ohio says let's adopt the pre-2009 Massachusetts standards for 2 years until we develop our own. Dakota, North Dakota, could decide whether it wanted to go back to its 2005 standards, which I don't think there's much indication of, you know, encouragement for here, because I don't think people thought they were that wonderful. So you could just say, let's do one of these possibilities, or adopt the California standards or the Indiana 2006 standards, those were also good, for 2 years while we develop our own, and then make sure you set up a system. Each state can do that. Or you can decide, maybe we don't want state standards altogether. I mean, there's a libertarian position on this too. Let's just have, there are different possibilities to think about. You just want to get out of the cobweb that you're caught in at the national level, which has forces behind it that you can't control.
Part of that is going to be getting rid of the SBAC testing.
Yeah, start by declaring a moratorium on any Common Core-based test. Defund it or delay it. And then you've got to change your standards, because as long as you have a Common Core-based set of standards, then you will have to have a Common Core-based test. That is the law in every state.
One thing I was going to say too, folks, you have to think about, we've got to get back to what this is all about. It's about local control. Yes. It's about the federal government taking over our educational system. And everybody's always preached local control. You remember Measure 2? That was what everybody talked about. Look, folks, they have to fund our schools. It's right in the Constitution. You have to read our laws. It says the legislature shall provide for a free public education. We have local control at our school boards. You have to go to your school board meetings. You have to talk to your school board members, and if they don't listen, then you replace them. What's happened is this thing called ND Cell. And look it up. It's been around for a long time. And it's called NBCEL. And it is the association that has been dominating the administrators and the superintendents for a long time. When you go to a school board meeting, watch who controls the meeting. And the person controlling the meeting is not supposed to be, not the superintendent. I'm going to ask our school board to make sure that if we're having a meeting, the superintendent's not there. Because they're controlling the agenda, not the school board. Why we elect school board members is because they are the most powerful. They can hire and fire. They're the ones we have to get the empowerment to. And that's my suggestion.
Okay, as Amy was saying, thank you so much for coming because I interrupted her.
Rewind.
Rewind.
I want to say thanks to everybody for being here. There was a good turnout. I'm glad to see it. Lots of parents just getting to know what's going on. Like Stacy said earlier, it cost us a little bit of money to get Dr. Stotsky here. We've had donations. We can always use more. It's all on donations. She's not taking any money for being here. We paid for her hotel and her flight, and that's obviously not free. But let's give Dr. Stotsky a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll make sure